You're safe now. The words would come later, but on that morning in May 1945, safety was a language no one in the square believed in anymore. The town lay quiet under a pale spring sky, buildings hollowed but standing, windows open to a wind that carried the faint scent of river water and ash. Anna Weiss knelt in what had once been a bakery doorway, her skirt pressed into dust that used to be flour. Her hands moved slowly through the rubble, not frantic, not wild, just methodical. Brick fragments, splintered wood, a bent tin scoop. She brushed each aside as if she were sorting through memories instead of debris. She weighed less than 90 pounds now. The bones of her wrists showed sharp beneath her skin, but her back remained straight. Across the square, an American Jeep rolled in and stopped near the dry fountain at the center. The engine ticked as it cooled. Private Daniel Whitmore stepped out, boots meeting cobblestone with a dull scrape. He was 29 years old, from a farm outside Des Moines, Iowa, a man who knew the difference between hunger and appetite. He had seen cities before, rows of them, each carrying the same silence after surrender. He adjusted the strap of his helmet and scanned the square the way soldiers do, windows, rooftops, shadows, until his eyes settled on her. She was not begging. She was not reaching toward anyone. She was digging. He watched for a full 10 seconds. 10 quiet seconds where nothing moved but her hands. A breeze lifted loose strands of her light brown hair, brushing them across her face. She did not push them away. She kept searching. Daniel took a step forward, then another. Gravel shifted under his boots. Anna heard him. Her hands paused, just briefly, then resumed. She did not look up. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the thinness of her cheeks, the dry line at the edge of her lips. Close enough to notice the faint letters stitched onto her faded gray dress. PW. Prisoner of war. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a D-ration chocolate bar, still wrapped in brown paper. It felt heavier than it was. He held it out, not touching her, just extending his hand into her field of vision. She did not take it. The silence between them stretched. Somewhere down the street, a door closed. A bird startled from a rooftop. Anna's fingers tightened around a small clump of dust mixed with grain. She let it fall through her hand. Daniel spoke, his voice even. Food. She understood the word. Everyone understood that word. Still, she did not lift her head. In her mind were years of warnings, images painted in loud colors, stories told in classrooms and camps about what American soldiers would do. Kindness was not part of that picture. Daniel lowered himself slowly to one knee, so he was no longer standing over her. The movement was unhurried. He unwrapped the chocolate bar halfway, broke off a square, and placed it in his own mouth. He chewed, swallowed. Then he extended the rest toward her again. It's safe, he said quietly. The wind shifted. Anna finally looked up. Her eyes were pale blue, ringed with exhaustion, but clear. She did not see a monster. She saw a man with dust on his boots and tired lines at the corners of his eyes. She saw someone waiting. Not forcing. Waiting. Her hand moved before her pride could argue. She took the chocolate. It felt dense in her palm, real in a way nothing else had felt in weeks. She hesitated 1 second longer, then brought it to her mouth. The sweetness was almost too much. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in concentration, forcing herself to eat slowly. Daniel watched without speaking. He did not smile. He did not step closer. He simply stayed there, grounded, as if this small square of chocolate required witness. When she finished, she lowered her hand and met his eyes again. No thank you. No tears. Just a steady look. He nodded once, as if acknowledging an equal. Then he stood and walked back toward the Jeep. He did not look back. The next morning, he returned. The square looked the same. The fountain still dry. The building still hollow. Anna was there again, kneeling in the same doorway. This time, when his boots scraped against stone, she did look up. He held out a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. Again, he did not hand it directly to her. He set it on a clean section of brick beside her and stepped back. She studied him for a moment, then picked it up. Why? She asked the word. Shaped carefully, her accent thick but clear. Daniel considered the question. It hung between them like the dust in the air. He could have said many things. Orders. Mercy. Policy. Instead, he shrugged slightly. Because you're human, he replied. The answer was simple. It did not try to fix the war. It did not try to rewrite history. It only named what stood in front of him. Anna held his gaze longer this time. Something shifted, not in her posture, which remained straight, but in the space around her. The square did not feel quite as empty. Daniel glanced at the letters on her dress again. Anna? He asked, gesturing gently toward her. She hesitated, then nodded. Anna. He tapped his own chest lightly. Daniel. She repeated it softly, testing the shape of the name. Daniel. A truck rumbled somewhere beyond the buildings. Voices carried faintly from another street. The world was rebuilding itself in small, uneven sounds. Daniel reached into his pocket once more and pulled out a folded paper with a stamp. He did not hand it to her. He only showed it briefly, then tucked it away again. Regulations. Lines he was not supposed to cross. He looked back at her, at the steadiness in her thin frame. You'll be all right, he said, almost to himself. Anna brushed dust from her hands and rose slowly to her feet. Even standing, she barely reached his shoulder. But she stood tall. The wind caught her dress, lifting the fabric slightly before letting it fall. Daniel met her eyes one last time that morning. The words came without ceremony, without drama. You're safe now. Not a promise of forever. Not a claim of ownership. Just a statement of the present moment. Safe. Here. In this square. In this breath. Anna did not answer. She did not need to. She had taken the food on her own terms. She had stood up on her own strength. And as Daniel walked back toward the jeep, the town behind him still broken but quieter somehow, it was unclear who had saved whom. The third morning came with low clouds and the smell of rain moving in from the river. The square was quieter than before, as if the town itself had grown tired of holding its breath. Daniel arrived on foot this time. The jeep had been reassigned to supply runs, and the walk gave him time to think. His boots echoed softly along the street, passing buildings whose doors hung open like unanswered questions. Anna was not in the doorway. For a moment, he felt something unfamiliar, a small tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with duty. Then he saw her across the square near the dry fountain, standing instead of kneeling. She was speaking with an older woman wrapped in a dark coat 2 sizes too large. Anna's posture was the same as before, straight, composed, even in weakness. She held a small bundle of cloth in her hands. When she noticed Daniel, she did not wave. She finished what she was saying, placed the bundle into the older woman's arms, and only then stepped back. The older woman nodded once, eyes damp but steady, and walked away. Daniel approached slowly. Good morning, he said. Anna answered in careful English. Good morning, Daniel. The name sounded firmer now, less fragile on her tongue. He noticed the change immediately. There was color in her cheeks, faint but present. Not health yet, but movement toward it. He held out a canteen. Water, he said. She took it without hesitation this time and drank, measured, not rushed. A drop slipped down her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. He glanced toward the street where the older woman had disappeared. Your mother? He asked. Anna shook her head. Neighbor. She paused, searching for the right word. Alone. Daniel nodded. Alone was a word both of them understood. He reached into his jacket and removed a small cloth sack. Inside were 2 boiled potatoes and a slice of bread from the morning ration. He handed the sack to her directly. She accepted it, then surprised him by dividing the contents immediately. 1 potato she placed back into the cloth and extended it toward him. He frowned slightly. For you, she said. He shook his head. I have enough. She did not withdraw her hand. Share, she replied simply. The word hung between them, uncomplicated. Daniel hesitated, then accepted the potato. He held it for a moment, feeling the warmth still trapped inside the skin. They stood there eating in silence, not as rescuer and prisoner, but as 2 people taking in calories on a gray morning. Across the square, 2 American soldiers passed by, glancing briefly at the scene. One raised an eyebrow, but kept walking. Regulations were clear. Assistance was to be organized through official channels. Individual aid blurred lines. Daniel knew this. He also knew that lines drawn on paper did not always match the lines drawn in a person's conscience. When they finished eating, Anna folded the empty cloth carefully and tucked it into her pocket. I can work, she said suddenly. The statement was direct. Daniel looked at her, unsure he had understood. She repeated it, slower. I can work. Clean. Cook. Teach. Teach. The word landed differently. He studied her face. You were a teacher? She nodded. Before. The single word carried years inside it. He imagined a classroom somewhere in this town, desks in neat rows, chalk dust and sunlight, children repeating lessons in steady voices. English? He asked. She gave a faint smile. Little. A drop of rain struck the stone near Daniel's boot. Then another. Within seconds, the sky opened in a steady, soaking downpour. The square emptied quickly, doors closing, footsteps hurrying. Daniel removed his field jacket and held it out toward Anna. She hesitated only a moment before accepting it. The fabric swallowed her thin frame. They moved together under the overhang of the bakery doorway. The rain came down hard, drumming against the cobblestones, washing dust into dark streams. Anna watched the water gather and run along the street. It smells clean, she said quietly. Daniel breathed in. Wet stone, river wind, a hint of earth. Yes, he answered. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The rain created a small world around them, narrowing everything to the sound of water and breath. Anna broke the silence. You have family? She asked. Daniel nodded. A mother, a younger sister. They run the farm now. Farm, she repeated, as if tasting the idea. Corn, soybeans, 60 acres. He did not know why he added the number, but he did. She nodded, picturing something she had never seen. I had a piano, she said after a moment. In our house. The image felt almost impossible against the broken buildings around them. You played? He asked. My mother, she replied. Every Sunday. The rain softened, shifting from heavy sheets to a gentle fall. Daniel looked at her, really looked, not at the thinness or the letters stitched to her dress, but at the steadiness that had survived everything else. There is a temporary school being set up, he said slowly. For children. Basic reading. Numbers. It is small. Anna's eyes lifted sharply. Where? He gestured down the street toward a church with its steeple still intact. There. She stepped forward out of the shelter as the rain thinned to mist. I can help, she said, more firmly now. Daniel studied her for a long second. Offering food had been simple. Offering a path back into purpose was something else entirely. It required trust from both sides. He nodded once. Come tomorrow morning, he said. 8 o'clock. She repeated it carefully. 8 o'clock. He turned to leave, then paused. Anna. She waited. You do not owe me anything. She held his gaze without blinking. I know, she replied. The answer was calm, unburdened. As he walked away, the square looked different again. Not repaired, not restored, but rearranged in some quiet, invisible way. Behind him, Anna removed the jacket from her shoulders, folded it neatly, and carried it with both hands as if it were not a symbol of protection, but simply a borrowed coat to be returned. The rain stopped completely. A thin shaft of light broke through the clouds, touching the dry fountain at the center of the square. Anna glanced at it once, then began walking toward the church, her steps slow but certain, the borrowed jacket draped over her arm, her spine straight, her pace steady, as if hunger had not defined her, and safety was not something given, but something chosen, one deliberate step at a time. The church bell did not ring that morning. It had not rung in months. The rope still hung from the wooden beam inside the narrow tower, but the town had grown used to silence. At 8 o'clock sharp, Anna stood at the church steps with Daniel's folded jacket resting over her arm. The air carried the clean scent left behind by the rain, and sunlight filtered through scattered clouds, turning puddles into mirrors. Daniel approached from the far end of the street, clipboard tucked under his arm, boots damp from crossing wet cobblestones. He noticed immediately that Anna had arrived early. She stood straight, hands steady, eyes alert, not waiting to be chosen, ready to begin. You are on time, he said. Yes, she answered. Always. He held the church door open, and she stepped inside. The interior smelled of old wood and dust stirred by movement. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows that had survived intact, scattering muted colors across the pews. Near the front, long tables had been arranged in rows. A chalkboard leaned against the wall, slightly crooked. A box of stubby pencils sat in the center of one table. 6 children, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 10, sat quietly, their feet not quite touching the floor. They turned to look when Anna entered. Daniel watched their faces. There was no fear, only curiosity. Anna removed the jacket and handed it back to him without a word. He took it, nodded once, and stepped aside. This is Anna, he told the children. She will help with reading. The children looked at her carefully, as children do when measuring someone new. Anna walked to the chalkboard. She picked up a piece of chalk and held it for a second, feeling its weight. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from memory. Then she wrote a single word in careful letters. House. She turned back to the children. House, she said clearly. She pointed to the word, then to the door behind them. House. One small boy repeated it, hesitant. House. She nodded. Yes. She wrote another word beneath it. River. She pointed toward the window where a thin strip of blue water was visible beyond rooftops. River. The children followed her gesture. River, they echoed. Daniel stood near the back of the room, arms crossed loosely, observing. He had expected awkwardness, tension, something brittle in the air. Instead, he saw rhythm returning. Anna moved between the tables slowly, correcting a pencil grip here, adjusting a page there. She did not hover. She did not rush. When one girl struggled to pronounce a word, Anna knelt beside her chair, lowering herself to eye level. Slow, she said gently. Take your time. The girl tried again. This time, the word came out clear. Anna smiled, not broadly, but enough. The morning passed in steady increments of chalk dust and quiet repetition. Outside, a wagon rolled by, its wheels sending small ripples through puddles. Inside, the children's voices rose and fell like a tide finding its pattern. When the lesson ended, Daniel dismissed the group. The children gathered their papers and filed out, offering shy nods to Anna as they passed. One small girl paused and handed Anna a folded scrap of paper. On it was a drawing of the church with a small figure standing at the chalkboard. Anna looked at it carefully. Thank you, she said. The girl ran off to catch up with the others. The church grew quiet again. Daniel stepped forward. You were good, he said simply. Anna placed the drawing on the table. They are quick, she replied. He studied her face. There was color there now, a faint strength settling beneath her skin. This is temporary, he said. Supplies are limited. Teachers are few. She nodded. Temporary is enough. He leaned against one of the pews. Some people may not understand, he added. The words were not a warning, only an acknowledgement. Anna met his eyes. Some people did not understand before, she said calmly. The sentence held no accusation, only fact. Footsteps sounded at the doorway. An older American officer stood there, hat tucked under his arm. He glanced from Daniel to Anna, then to the chalkboard where the word river still remained. Whitmore, he said evenly. Daniel straightened. Sir. The officer walked a few steps inside, boots echoing softly. This the civilian you mentioned? Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. She has experience teaching. The officer looked at Anna. His expression was measured, neither warm nor cold. You speak English? He asked. Yes, Anna answered. I am learning. He considered her for a moment. The silence stretched, not hostile, but weighty. Then he gave a small nod. Keep it orderly, he said to Daniel. We are rebuilding more than buildings. Yes, sir, Daniel replied. The officer turned and left. The door closed gently behind him. Daniel exhaled, not sharply, just enough to release the tension he had not shown. Anna had remained still the entire time, her posture unchanged. He is fair, she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. You noticed? She gave the faintest lift of one shoulder. He listened. Daniel walked toward the chalkboard and erased the words slowly. White dust fell to the floor. You will come tomorrow? He asked. Anna nodded. Tomorrow. They stepped outside together. The sun had climbed higher, warming the stones beneath their feet. The square felt less hollow now, more like a place where sound might linger instead of vanish. Daniel paused at the church steps. Anna, he said. She turned. Yes. He searched for the right words and settled on the simplest. You did not need saving in there. She held his gaze, steady and clear. No, she agreed. I needed a door. He nodded once. The distinction settled between them like something solid and understood. As they parted ways, Anna walked toward the center of the square, passing the dry fountain that no longer looked abandoned but patient. Daniel watched her for a moment before turning down the opposite street. The town was still scarred, walls still cracked, windows still missing panes. But inside one church, 6 children had learned 2 new words that morning. And a woman who had once searched for grain in dust had written them on a board with steady hands, reclaiming not only her strength, but her name, one letter at a time. The 4th morning arrived with a thin layer of mist hovering just above the river, softening the outlines of rooftops and chimneys. The town moved more easily now, carts rolling earlier, doors opening with less hesitation. Inside the church, the tables had been rearranged to make space for 2 additional benches. Word had spread. 8 children sat waiting when Anna stepped through the doorway, her steps steady, a small stack of salvaged paper tucked beneath her arm. Daniel was already there, sleeves rolled up, adjusting the angle of the chalkboard so it caught more light. He glanced at her and gave a brief nod. No ceremony, just acknowledgement. Anna placed the papers on the front table and began distributing them one by one. Each sheet had lines drawn carefully by hand to guide small letters into place. "Today we write," she said clearly. The children straightened. One boy swung his legs beneath the bench, unable to keep them still. Anna wrote a new word on the board. Future. She paused after forming each letter, allowing the chalk to make a soft, deliberate sound. The children watched the word appear as if it were something fragile. Future, she repeated. It means tomorrow. Next week. Next year. She tapped the board lightly. It is not here yet, but it is coming. Daniel listened from the back of the room. He had heard many speeches in the past year, most of them loud, filled with certainty. This was different. No volume, no grand promises. Just a word placed carefully in front of children who needed one. The lesson unfolded slowly. Anna moved between tables, correcting posture, guiding small hands to shape letters with patience. When one child pressed too hard and tore the paper, Anna did not scold. She placed her own sheet over the tear and said, "Again." The boy tried again. This time, the line held. Outside, the mist lifted, revealing a clearer sky. The bell rope in the tower swayed gently in the morning breeze, though no one pulled it. As the children practiced writing the word future, Daniel stepped outside briefly to speak with a supply clerk unloading crates from a truck. The clerk handed him a small bundle of notebooks tied with twine. Last of them, the clerk said. Daniel nodded his thanks and carried the bundle back inside. He placed it quietly on the table near Anna. She looked at the notebooks, then at him. "For them?" she asked. "For you," he replied. "So they do not have to write on scraps." She untied the twine and ran her fingers lightly across the covers. Plain brown paper. Blank pages inside. To anyone else, they were simple supplies. To her, they were possibility. She distributed them carefully, one per child. The children opened the covers slowly, as if opening something rare. "Write your name," Anna instructed. The room filled with the soft scratch of pencils. Names appeared in uneven lines, some letters backward, some oversized. Anna watched each child complete the task. "A name," she said, "is the first promise you keep." Daniel leaned against the doorway, observing the way she spoke. Not as someone asking for approval, not as someone proving worth, simply as someone who belonged at the front of a classroom. When the lesson ended, the children filed out with their notebooks clutched to their chests. One lingered at the door. "Will there be school tomorrow?" the child asked. Anna smiled faintly. "Yes," she answered. "There will be." After the last footsteps faded, Daniel approached. "You said future," he remarked. "Why that word?" Anna wiped chalk dust from her fingers. "Because it is quiet," she said. "It does not shout, but it stays." He considered that. Outside, the square was busier than it had been weeks ago. A cart of vegetables stood near the fountain, a small tray of potatoes and carrots taking place without raised voices. Daniel glanced toward the street, then back at her. "There is a meeting this afternoon," he said. "Town council. They are deciding how to assign work permits." Anna's expression did not change. "And?" He hesitated only slightly. "Your name will be mentioned." The air between them shifted, subtle but present. Anna folded the remaining paper into a neat stack. "Mentioned how?" she asked. "Some think it is too soon," Daniel answered honestly, "to involve civilians in official roles." She nodded once, absorbing the information without outward reaction. "It is not my decision," she said. Daniel studied her face. "No," he agreed. "But it affects you." She placed the chalk back into its box and closed the lid. "Then we will listen," she said simply. The meeting took place in a room above the town hall, a narrow space with 3 tall windows overlooking the square. Chairs scraped against wooden floors as men and women gathered around a long table. Daniel stood near the back wall, uniform pressed, hands clasped behind him. Anna sat on a chair beside the window, her posture upright, hands resting calmly in her lap. Voices rose and fell across the table, some cautious, some firm. Words like rebuilding, stability, responsibility circled through the air. One council member, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke plainly. "We need teachers," he said. "We need order." Another responded, "We also need trust." The room quieted. All eyes shifted briefly toward Anna. She did not lower her gaze. She did not speak out of turn. She simply met the silence with steadiness. Finally, the presiding councilwoman leaned forward. "Miss Weiss," she said, "do you intend to stay?" The question carried weight, not accusation. Anna answered without hesitation. "If there is work to do, yes." The councilwoman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There is work to do," she said. The decision was not announced with applause. No one struck the table in triumph. It was quieter than that. A note written in the ledger. A line added beside her name. Temporary appointment. Community school. Daniel exhaled quietly from the back of the room. As the meeting adjourned, chairs shifted and conversations resumed in low tones. Anna rose from her seat and stepped toward the window. The square below looked smaller from this height, but more defined. The fountain at the center no longer seemed dry. It seemed patient. Daniel approached her. "Temporary," he said. She nodded. "Temporary is enough." They stood there for a moment. Side by side, not touching, not speaking further. Outside, a child ran across the square holding a brown notebook high above his head, showing it to a woman standing near the vegetable cart. The woman leaned down to look, her face softening. Anna watched the exchange carefully. "Future," Daniel said quietly, almost testing the word. She allowed herself the faintest smile. "Yes," she replied. "It is coming." And as they descended the narrow staircase back into the open air, the town carried on around them, not healed, not whole, but moving forward one written word at a time, under a sky that no longer felt as heavy as it once had. The days that followed the council meeting unfolded with a steadier rhythm, as if the town had agreed, quietly and without ceremony, to keep moving forward. The church doors opened each morning at 8 o'clock sharp. The chalkboard no longer leaned crookedly against the wall. Daniel had fastened it properly with 2 salvaged brackets, measuring the distance with careful precision as though the angle of a board could determine the stability of a future. Anna arrived earlier than anyone else, sweeping the floor with a worn broom she had found in a storage closet. Dust gathered in thin lines near the doorway, pushed out into the sunlight where it no longer lingered in the air. She worked without being asked. She worked because it was hers to tend now. On the 5th morning, a crate arrived addressed to the temporary school. Inside were more pencils, a bundle of thin arithmetic books, and a small American flag folded neatly at the bottom. Daniel carried the crate in and set it near the front table. Anna lifted the flag carefully, unfolding it halfway. The fabric was clean, bright against the muted wood of the pews. She studied it without comment. "It is for the wall," Daniel said quietly. She nodded once. Together they hung it beside the chalkboard. The colors caught the light from the stained glass windows, red deepened by blue reflections. When the children entered, their eyes went immediately to the new addition. No one saluted. No one questioned. They simply noticed. Anna began the lesson with arithmetic that morning, numbers written in steady columns. Addition first, then subtraction. A boy near the back struggled with carrying numbers across the line. Anna guided his pencil gently. "Slow," she reminded him. "Do not rush." Daniel watched as she moved through the room. Her steps were no longer cautious. They were deliberate. Strength had returned to her shoulders. Her voice carried farther now, reaching the corners of the church without strain. At midday, a knock sounded at the open door. Daniel stepped outside to find 2 American soldiers from a nearby unit standing near the steps. One of them glanced inside. "Heard about the school," he said. His tone was neutral, neither mocking nor approving. Daniel nodded. "It is small." The second soldier looked toward Anna, who was explaining multiplication to a cluster of children around the front table. "She is the teacher?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. The first soldier studied the scene for a moment longer. "Different times," he said quietly. Daniel met his gaze. "Yes," he answered. After a pause, the soldiers walked on, their boots echoing against the cobblestones. Inside, Anna finished the lesson and dismissed the children for the day. As they filed out, one boy stopped in front of the newly hung flag. "What does it mean?" he asked, pointing upward. Anna considered her answer. She looked at Daniel briefly, then back at the boy. "It means people are trying again," she said. The boy seemed satisfied with that and ran out into the square. The church grew quiet once more. Daniel closed the door gently and turned toward her. "You chose your words carefully," he observed. She smiled faintly. "Words are tools," she replied. "They must fit." In the afternoon, Anna remained behind to sort the arithmetic books. She stacked them evenly, smoothing the covers with her palm. Daniel approached the front table and rested his hands lightly on the wood. "You have gained weight," he said, not as a compliment, but as a fact. She looked up at him, aware of the observation but unembarrassed. "Yes," she answered. "There is bread now." He nodded. "There is bread now," he repeated. A breeze moved through the open windows, carrying distant laughter from the square below. For the first time since he had arrived in the town, Daniel felt the absence of urgency. Not the absence of responsibility, but the absence of fear. It settled into him quietly, like the slow warmth of sunlight after a long winter. "My unit will rotate soon," he said after a moment. The words entered the room gently but held weight. Anna did not react immediately. She finished aligning the last stack of books before speaking. "In a few weeks," he replied. "Orders are not final, but likely." She nodded once. "And you will go home?" He considered the question. "Eventually," he said. "There is paperwork first, then transport." She traced the edge of one arithmetic book with her fingertip. "Home," she repeated softly, as though measuring the distance of the word. Silence followed, not strained, not sorrowful, simply present. Daniel looked toward the chalkboard, where the word future had been erased days ago but seemed to linger in memory. "You will stay?" he asked. Anna met his eyes steadily. "There is work to do," she said. He recognized the answer. It was the same one she had given the councilwoman. It was not dependent on him. It was anchored in something larger. Late that afternoon, clouds gathered again above the river. A brief shower passed over the town, light and fleeting. Anna stood at the church doorway, watching the rain fall in thin silver lines. Daniel stepped beside her. "It smells clean," he said, echoing her earlier words from weeks before. She glanced at him and allowed a small smile. "Yes," she replied. The rain stopped as quickly as it had begun. Sunlight broke through, reflecting off wet stone and making the square shimmer faintly. A group of children ran across the open space, notebooks tucked beneath their arms, shouting multiplication tables at one another as though they were secrets too exciting to keep quiet. Anna watched them carefully. "They will remember," she said. Daniel followed her gaze. "Yes," he agreed. "They will." She turned back toward the interior of the church and stepped inside to close the windows before evening fell. Daniel remained on the steps for a moment longer, looking at the town that had once seemed suspended in dust and hunger. Now it carried movement, sound, small arguments over vegetables, laughter over arithmetic mistakes, the faint echo of possibility. He did not feel like a hero standing there. He felt like a witness. When he finally re-entered the church, Anna had finished tidying the tables. The small American flag hung still beside the chalkboard. The arithmetic books were stacked neatly in rows. She stood near the front, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, her posture straight. Not waiting to be saved. Not waiting to be told who she was. The work had become her answer. And as evening settled gently over the town, casting long shadows across the square, the church stood open one last time before night, holding within its wooden walls the quiet proof that dignity, once reclaimed, does not ask permission to remain. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, folded in thirds, the paper slightly creased from travel. Daniel stood near the supply desk in the town hall when it was handed to him. He recognized the format before he read a single word. Orders. Rotation confirmed. Transfer in 10 days. He did not react immediately. He folded the paper once more and slipped it into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket. Outside, the square moved through its usual rhythm. A cart of carrots and onions stood near the fountain. 2 men argued quietly over the price of flour. Children crossed the cobblestones in uneven lines, notebooks tucked under their arms like small shields. Daniel walked back toward the church at a measured pace. He did not rush. He did not slow. Inside, Anna was alone at the front table, mending the spine of an arithmetic book with thin twine. The afternoon light angled through the stained glass, laying soft color across her hands. She looked up when the door opened. "You are early," she said. He closed the door behind him. Yes. He did not remove his jacket. He stood there for a moment, as if adjusting to the quiet. Anna studied his face, not searching for drama, only reading the shift in air. It is final, she said calmly. He nodded once. 10 days. The number settled between them, clear and solid. She returned her attention to the book in her hands, pulling the twine tight, knotting it with careful fingers. 10 days is time, she replied. He watched her for a second longer, then stepped forward and set his cap on the table. They are sending me west first, he said. Processing. Then home. She nodded again. Your mother will be glad. Yes, he answered. She will. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It carried the weight of acknowledgement, not loss. Outside, the faint sound of children practicing multiplication drifted in through the open window. Anna finished tying the knot and pressed the repaired book flat against the table. We begin a new lesson tomorrow, she said. History. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. Whose history? She looked at him directly. Theirs. The answer was simple. It did not need explanation. He walked toward the chalkboard and ran his hand lightly across its surface. Chalk dust clung to his fingertips. You will tell them everything? He asked. Anna considered the question. No, she said. Only what they can carry. The next morning, the church filled earlier than usual. Word had spread quietly that Daniel would be leaving. No announcement had been made, but towns are attentive to movement. The children's sense changed the way animals sense weather. Anna stood at the front, the word history written in steady letters across the board. Daniel remained near the back wall, observing, hands clasped loosely behind him. History, Anna began, is not only dates. It is choices. She wrote the second word beneath the first. Choices. The children copied it carefully into their notebooks. One boy raised his hand. Are we in history now? He asked. Anna paused. The room waited. Yes, she answered. But we do not know how it will be written. Daniel felt the truth of that sentence settle into him. The lesson continued with simple examples, small stories of rebuilding wells, planting gardens, sharing bread. No mention of uniforms or flags. Only acts that could be understood by young minds. When the lesson ended, the children lingered. One by one, they approached Daniel. A small girl handed him a folded drawing of the church with two figures standing near the chalkboard. A boy offered a firm handshake, repeating a multiplication table as if it were a farewell speech. Daniel accepted each gesture quietly. No long words. No speeches. Just eye contact. After the last child left, the church felt larger, the air thinner. Anna walked toward the window and looked out at the square. They will remember you, she said. He shook his head slightly. They will remember you, he replied. She did not argue. Outside, clouds gathered again over the river, casting long shadows across the rooftops. The town had grown used to brief storms followed by sunlight. Daniel stepped closer to the front table. I did not expect this, he said. She turned to face him. What? To leave something behind, he answered. She studied him for a moment. You did not leave something, she said. You opened a door. The phrase echoed her own words from weeks earlier. He allowed a small breath of laughter, barely audible. And you walked through, he said. Yes, she replied. That afternoon, the councilwoman stopped by the church with a small envelope in her hand. Inside was a formal paper confirming Anna's appointment for the remainder of the year. The ink was fresh, the signature steady. Anna accepted it without ceremony, folded it once, and placed it inside one of the arithmetic books. Temporary becomes longer, the councilwoman remarked softly. Anna inclined her head. Long enough, she answered. On Daniel's final morning in the town, the square felt brighter than usual. Sunlight struck the fountain and lingered there. The vegetable cart stood half empty, a sign that trade had improved. Daniel carried a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He stopped at the church steps. The door was open. Inside, Anna was arranging notebooks into neat rows. She heard his footsteps and turned. No tears, no trembling, only presence. He stepped inside slowly. I leave in 1 hour, he said. She nodded. Then we do not waste it. She reached into the front drawer of the table and removed a single sheet of paper. On it was written one word in careful English letters. Future. She handed it to him. For your farm, she said. He looked at the word, then at her. It belongs here, he replied. She shook her head gently. It belongs where you go. He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket, beside the orders that had once felt heavier. They walked together to the church doorway. The square waited outside, open and ordinary. Daniel paused on the top step. "Anna," he said. She met his gaze. "Yes." He searched for something profound, but found only truth. "Keep the door open." She gave a small nod. "It is already open." He descended the steps and crossed the square at an even pace. No parade, no farewell speech, just boots against stone and the steady movement of a man returning home. Anna remained at the doorway, watching until he reached the far end of the street and turned the corner. She did not step forward. She did not call out. When he disappeared from view, she returned inside the church, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote a new word on the board for the children who would arrive within the hour. Begin. The chalk made a soft, certain sound. Outside, the town continued its quiet work under a sky that no longer felt heavy, and inside the church, the door remained open, not because someone had been rescued, but because someone had chosen to stay. Autumn arrived quietly along the river, not with sudden cold, but with a gradual thinning of light. The leaves on the trees beyond the square shifted from green to pale gold, then to a deeper rust that caught in the morning sun. The church door remained open each day at 8 o'clock, just as it had before. Anna stood at the chalkboard before the children entered, sleeves rolled neatly to her wrists, a thin scarf wrapped once around her neck. The word begin had long since been erased. In its place were longer sentences now, written in steady English and German side by side. The children no longer hesitated when they spoke. Their voices carried confidence, rising above the creak of pews and the shuffle of small shoes on wood. Weeks had passed since Daniel walked across the square with a canvas bag over his shoulder. The town had not stopped when he left. It had adjusted. The vegetable cart expanded to include apples from a nearby orchard. A carpenter repaired the cracked steps leading to the fountain. The bell rope in the tower was finally pulled one Sunday morning, and the sound echoed across rooftops that had grown accustomed to silence. Anna stood at the front of the classroom as the children copied sentences into their notebooks. "A future is built," she read aloud, one choice at a time. The words were no longer abstract. They lived in the town around them. After class, she remained behind to straighten the rows of desks that had been donated from a neighboring village. The arithmetic books were nearly filled. Ink had replaced pencil in some hands. Outside, a group of older boys practiced measuring lumber for new benches in the square, their rulers held carefully, their lines drawn with concentration. Anna stepped outside with a stack of completed notebooks tucked beneath her arm. She paused at the fountain, where water now flowed again in a thin, steady stream. It was not grand. It was not loud, but it was movement. A woman approached her, the same neighbor who once stood in a dark coat too large for her shoulders. "The children read to me last night," the woman said softly. Anna inclined her head. "They read well. They read clearly," the woman corrected gently. Anna allowed a faint smile. Yes. Letters had begun to arrive at the town hall, forwarded from American units stationed across the ocean. One envelope bore a familiar handwriting, steady and precise. Anna received it in the late afternoon when the councilwoman stopped by the church. She held the envelope for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The word future had been copied carefully at the top in her own style of lettering. Beneath it were a few lines written in clear English. "The farm is quiet this year. The corn stands taller than I remember. My mother asks about the school. I told her it remains open." He did not write much more. He did not need to. Anna folded the letter and placed it inside the arithmetic book where she kept important documents. She did not linger on it. There was work to do. That evening, as the sky deepened into early dusk, Anna stayed late in the church, preparing a small presentation for the children's parents. Candles were placed along the windowsills. The chalkboard displayed sentences written by each child, their names printed boldly beneath their work. When the families entered, they carried a mixture of caution and curiosity. Anna stood at the front, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. She did not speak immediately. She allowed the parents to walk through the room, to see the notebooks, to hear their own children read aloud. The words stumbled at first, then steadied. One boy recited multiplication tables with quiet pride. A girl read a paragraph about planting seeds in spring. Applause was not loud, but it was present. Afterward, a father approached Anna, hat held against his chest. "Thank you," he said simply. She met his eyes. They did the work, she replied. Outside, the evening air carried a faint chill. The river reflected the first stars. Anna locked the church door and walked home along the cobblestones, her steps measured, her shoulders squared against the cooling wind. The town no longer felt suspended between past and future. It felt anchored. Winter arrived slowly, bringing frost to the edges of windows and a thin layer of ice along the fountain in the early mornings. The children wore heavier coats to class. Their breath lingered in the air as they recited history lessons, learning about distant lands and local rebuilding in the same steady tone. Anna continued to teach, her voice firm, her movements efficient. She did not speak often of the early days when bread was scarce and dust filled the square. She did not need to. The proof of change stood before her each morning in rows of attentive faces. One afternoon, as snow began to fall lightly over the rooftops, a small package arrived at the church. Inside was a wooden ruler, carved with careful lines, and the word "begin" etched along its length. No note accompanied it. Anna traced the letters with her fingertip and placed the ruler at the front of the classroom. Today, she told the children, we measure. They gathered around as she demonstrated how to draw straight lines across fresh pages. The ruler rested steady in her hand. Outside, snow gathered along the edges of the square, softening the outlines of stone and wood. The town moved more slowly in winter, but it did not stop. Bread was shared. Firewood was stacked neatly against walls. The bell rang each Sunday without fail. On the final day before the year turned, Anna stood alone in the church, the room quiet after the children had gone home. She walked to the chalkboard and wrote a single word in large, careful letters. Continue. She stepped back and regarded it without expression. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was simply accurate. She erased the board slowly, cleaned the chalk from her hands, and extinguished the candles one by one. When she stepped outside, the snow had ceased. The sky was clear. The river moved steadily beneath a thin crust of ice, patient and enduring. Anna closed the church door gently behind her and crossed the square, her footsteps leaving faint impressions in the snow that would soon be covered by others. The town did not belong to one soldier or one teacher. It belonged to those who chose to remain, to rebuild, to write new sentences where old ones had ended. And as winter settled fully over the rooftops, the door of the church remained ready to open again in the morning, not because someone had been rescued, but because someone had decided to keep teaching, to keep building, to keep beginning, and above all, to continue. Spring returned without announcement. Snow thinned along the edges of the square until only damp stone remained, dark and reflective in the morning light. The river shed its crust of ice and began to move more freely, carrying small fragments of winter downstream. Anna stood at the church doorway before the children arrived, breathing in the cool air that no longer stung her lungs. The scarf around her neck had been replaced by a lighter shawl. The door was open, as always. Inside, the wooden ruler marked "begin" rested beside the chalkboard, its carved letters worn smooth from use. The arithmetic books had grown thicker with pages filled. Some children now wrote in ink without blotting the paper. Change had become ordinary. On the first warm morning of April, a cart rolled into the square bearing not vegetables, but lumber. Long planks were stacked neatly, secured with rope. Two men from a neighboring town stepped down and began measuring the open space near the fountain. Anna watched from the church steps as they drove small wooden stakes into the ground to mark a new outline. A permanent schoolhouse, someone had suggested at the last council meeting. Not large, not elaborate, but brick instead of wood. Windows built for light. The church would remain, but the town was ready for more. The children gathered around the men, asking questions about nails and beams. Anna called them back gently. Observe, she said. Then return. Inside, she wrote a new word on the board. Foundation. The children repeated it carefully, syllable by syllable. It is what holds something up, she explained. It is not seen, but it is necessary. She did not look toward the square when she said it, yet the meaning extended beyond the classroom walls. That afternoon, a second letter arrived from across the ocean. The envelope bore a different postmark this time, farther inland. Anna opened it at the front table while sunlight filtered through the stained glass. The letter described planting season on 60 acres of farmland, rows measured in straight lines, seeds pressed into soil with patience. My sister has begun teaching at the small school near our farm, the letter read. She says children everywhere ask the same questions. Beneath the final line was a small drawing of a cornfield stretching toward a horizon. Anna folded the letter and placed it beside the first, her expression steady. She did not carry it home immediately. Instead, she finished grading arithmetic exercises, circling correct answers with precise red ink. Outside, hammers struck wood in measured rhythm as the outline of the new schoolhouse began to rise. Weeks passed, and the frame took shape. The children watched beams lifted into place, their notebooks now filled with lessons about measurement and balance. Anna incorporated the construction into her teaching. How many boards are needed if each wall is 20 feet long? She asked one morning. The children calculated carefully, pencils moving with new confidence. The bell in the church tower rang at noon, no longer tentative but clear. On a mild afternoon in May, a familiar jeep rolled into the square. It did not stop in the center. It parked near the edge of the street, as if unsure of its place. A man stepped out, older by posture, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper but not hardened. He wore civilian clothes now, not a uniform. Anna stood inside the church when she heard the engine cut off. She did not rush to the door. She finished writing the day's final sentence on the board. Continue to build. The children copied it into their notebooks. Only after dismissing them did she step outside. Daniel stood near the fountain, hat in hand, looking not at her, but at the rising frame of the new schoolhouse. He turned when he heard her footsteps. There was no surprise in his expression, only recognition. You came back, she said. He nodded once. For a visit. She studied him briefly. He looked rested. Grounded. Your farm? She asked. Planted, he replied. Growing. Silence settled comfortably between them. It did not need filling. The sound of hammers continued in the background, steady and purposeful. Daniel glanced toward the church door. Still open, he observed. Yes, she answered. They walked slowly toward the construction site. Children darted between stacks of lumber, careful not to interfere. One boy paused when he recognized Daniel and offered a shy nod. Daniel returned it. He did not step forward to claim attention. He remained slightly behind Anna as they approached the marked foundation. Brick, he said, examining the base. It will last, she replied. He looked at her. Then, directly. So will you, he said. The statement was not dramatic. It was factual. She met his gaze evenly. That is the plan. A breeze moved through the square, lifting the edge of her shawl. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the folded sheet of paper she had given him months earlier. The word future was creased along the edges, but intact. He handed it back to her. It belongs here, he said. She unfolded it carefully and regarded the familiar handwriting. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she folded it again and slipped it into the inside pocket of her dress. It belongs wherever it is carried, she replied. The afternoon light softened as the sun lowered behind the rooftops. The outline of the new schoolhouse cast long shadows across the square. The fountain flowed steadily at its center. Daniel looked around once more, taking in the vegetable cart, the repaired steps, the church door standing open as it always had. You did not need saving, he said quietly. She shook her head slightly. No, she answered. I needed time. He nodded, understanding more now than he had that first morning in the square. The children's voices drifted from the far end of the street, practicing spelling words as they walked home. Anna turned toward the church. There is class tomorrow, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. There usually is. He replaced his hat and stepped back toward the jeep, not hurried, not reluctant, just steady. Anna remained near the foundation of the new building, watching as the workers secured the final beam for the day. When the jeep engine started and rolled away, she did not follow it with her eyes for long. Instead, she looked down at the marked lines in the dirt, at the space that would soon hold walls and windows and desks filled with light. The river moved beyond the rooftops, constant and unafraid. The bell rope hung ready in the tower. And as the evening settled gently over the square, Anna turned and walked back into the church, where the chalkboard waited and the door remained open, not because someone had promised safety, but because someone had chosen to keep building, to keep teaching, and to keep the future in motion. Summer settled fully over the town, warm and deliberate, stretching daylight across the rooftops until evening felt distant and unhurried. The frame of the new schoolhouse stood complete now, brick walls rising solid, and even where wooden stakes once marked only intention. Windows had been set into place, their glass catching the sun and throwing pale reflections onto the square. The church door remained open each morning, but desks were slowly being carried across the cobblestones into the new building, one by one, in careful procession. Anna walked beside the children as they helped move the final stack of arithmetic books. No one complained about the weight. The act itself carried meaning. Inside the new schoolhouse, the air smelled of fresh mortar and sawdust. The floors were smooth, the walls bare but bright. Anna stood at the front of the main room and ran her hand lightly along the surface of the largest desk. It did not wobble. It did not creak. It held firm. "Foundation," she said quietly, almost to herself. The children arranged their notebooks in neat rows. Sunlight poured through the wide windows, illuminating chalk dust in soft beams. The wooden ruler carved with the word begin was placed at the center of the front table. Anna wrote the first sentence on the new chalkboard with deliberate care. "Welcome." The children repeated it aloud, their voices filling the space with steady confidence. Outside, townspeople paused to glance through the open doorway. No ribbon-cutting ceremony had been planned. No speeches had been prepared. The building itself was enough. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned to the square on foot. He had parked his Jeep at the edge of town, choosing to walk the last stretch. The sound of hammers had been replaced by the murmur of voices inside brick walls. He stopped near the fountain, which flowed steadily in the heat of early July. The water no longer seemed fragile. It seemed rooted. Through the open windows of the new schoolhouse, he heard children reciting multiplication tables, their rhythm even and sure. He did not step inside immediately. He remained near the doorway, observing. Anna stood at the front, sleeves rolled, chalk in hand. Her posture had grown stronger with each passing season. There was no trace of the thin, uncertain figure who once knelt in dust searching for grain. There was only a teacher in her classroom. When the lesson ended, the children noticed him first. A ripple of recognition passed quietly through the room. Anna turned, following their gaze. She did not appear surprised. "You see," she said to the children, "history returns." The class smiled, uncertain of the meaning but aware of its tone. Daniel stepped inside. The brick walls echoed his footsteps softly. "It looks different," he said. Anna inclined her head. "It is different." He glanced at the wide windows, the rows of desks, the chalkboard marked with steady handwriting. "You built this," he said. She shook her head gently. "We built this." The children gathered their books and filed out into the sunlight, leaving the two of them standing in the center of the room. The afternoon air carried the scent of cut wood and warm stone. Daniel walked toward the front desk, resting his hand briefly on its surface. "My sister asked about the school again," he said. "She wants to send books." Anna considered the offer carefully. "Books are always welcome," she replied. He nodded. "She will send them by autumn." Silence settled between them, comfortable and unforced. The open windows allowed the sound of the square to drift inside. A vendor calling out fresh bread, the clatter of a cart wheel against stone, distant laughter. Anna moved to the chalkboard and erased the word welcome slowly, the chalk leaving faint white traces that would never fully disappear. "You will not stay long," she said, not as a question. "No," he answered. "I leave tomorrow." She paused only a moment before writing a new word on the board. "Remain." He watched as the letters took shape. "You chose that carefully," he said. "Yes," she replied. "It is not the same as stay." He understood. Remain implied presence without ownership, continuity without control. Outside, a breeze shifted through the square, carrying the faint ring of the church bell as someone tested the rope again. Daniel stepped closer to the window and looked out over the town. The vegetable cart now stood beneath a canvas shade. The carpenter's shop had reopened fully. The fountain's basin reflected the bright sky. "It feels settled," he said. Anna joined him at the window. "It feels awake," she corrected gently. He smiled faintly at that. For a moment, neither spoke. There were no dramatic declarations left to make. The work had replaced them. Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a small envelope. "For the school," he said, placing it on the desk. Inside were several crisp dollar bills and a brief note written in steady script. Anna did not open it immediately. She placed her hand lightly over the envelope and met his eyes. "You already gave," she said. He shook his head. "This is different." She did not argue. She slipped the envelope into the drawer beside the arithmetic books. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long lines of light across the classroom floor, Daniel stepped back toward the doorway. "You do not need me here," he said quietly. Anna regarded him for a moment. "No," she agreed. "But you are part of it." He nodded once, accepting the distinction. Outside, the square moved through its evening rhythm. Children chased one another between benches newly installed around the fountain. A woman watered a row of small flowers planted along the edge of the church steps. Daniel descended the short set of brick stairs and paused at the edge of the square. He turned once more toward the schoolhouse. Through the open windows, he could see Anna at the front of the room, arranging notebooks into neat stacks, her movements precise and unhurried. She did not look toward him. She did not need to. The door remained open. The word "remain" stood clearly on the chalkboard, bright against the dark surface. And as Daniel walked toward the fading light at the end of the street, the town carried on around him, not because it had been rescued, but because it had chosen to rise, brick by brick, lesson by lesson, into something steady and enduring. Autumn returned again, not as a surprise, but as a rhythm the town now recognized. The leaves along the river shifted color with quiet confidence, and the brick schoolhouse stood firm against the cooling wind. Inside, the desks were no longer new. Their surfaces carried faint marks from months of lessons, small impressions left by steady pencils and careful hands. Anna arrived before sunrise, as she often did, unlocking the door and stepping into the stillness. The air inside held the soft scent of chalk and paper. She placed her shawl over the back of her chair and walked to the front of the room. On the chalkboard, the word "remain" had been erased weeks earlier, replaced each day by new lessons, new sentences, new numbers. Today she wrote a single line in clear English. "What we build, builds us." She stepped back and regarded it without expression. The town beyond the windows stirred gradually awake. The vegetable cart was replaced now by a small permanent stall built from wood and tin. The fountain continued to run, even as the mornings grew colder. The bell in the church tower rang each Sunday without hesitation. Life had settled into something steady. A letter arrived near midday, forwarded from across the ocean once again. Anna recognized the handwriting immediately, though it had grown more deliberate, more anchored. She waited until the children left for lunch before opening it. The paper unfolded with a faint crackle. "The farm is quiet now that harvest is finished," it read. "The fields are measured and stored. My mother says the corn was strong this year. She asks if the school still stands." He had included a small pressed corn leaf between the folds, flattened carefully. Anna held it between her fingers, feeling its dryness, its fragility. She placed it inside the arithmetic book where the earlier letters rested. There was no urgency in her movements, no trembling, only acknowledgement. That afternoon, a delegation from a neighboring village visited the square. They had heard of the school, of the steady attendance, of the way children now wrote letters to relatives without hesitation. They walked through the open doorway, observing the classroom with measured interest. Anna greeted them simply, without ceremony. She did not recount the early days of hunger or dust. She showed them the rows of filled notebooks, the arithmetic problems solved cleanly, the history lessons written in firm script. One of the visitors, a woman with silver hair pulled back tightly, examined the chalkboard. "You began in the church?" she asked. Anna nodded. "Yes." The woman's gaze moved to the brick walls around them. "And now here?" Anna inclined her head. "Yes." The conversation required no elaboration. The proof stood in the room itself. Later that week, a shipment of books arrived from overseas, packed carefully in sturdy boxes. The covers bore titles in English and German, simple stories about farms, rivers, seasons, and rebuilding. Anna gathered the children around as she opened the first box. Their eyes widened at the sight of so many pages waiting to be read. She did not speak at first. She allowed them to see the weight of it. "Books travel far," she said finally. "So do ideas." The children ran their fingers along the spines, reading titles aloud in halting but confident tones. One boy lifted a book about farming and traced the illustration of tall cornfields beneath a wide sky. Anna noticed and said nothing. Outside, the wind moved through the square, scattering a few dry leaves across the cobblestones. Daniel did not return that season. His absence did not leave a gap. It left a line that continued elsewhere. Anna understood that now. She no longer stood at the doorway searching the horizon for a jeep. She stood at the front of the classroom, shaping letters and numbers into tools the children could carry beyond the square. Winter approached again, gentler than the year before. The fountain slowed but did not freeze entirely. The new schoolhouse held warmth better than the church ever had. Anna added maps to the walls, carefully pinned and straightened. The children began studying geography, tracing rivers with their fingertips, measuring distances between towns with a carved wooden ruler. One morning, a small girl raised her hand. "Will we leave here one day?" she asked. Anna paused, chalk resting against the board. "Some of you will," she answered. "And some will stay." The girl considered this. "Which is better?" Anna set the chalk down gently. "The better choice," she said, "is the one made with care." The lesson moved on, but the question lingered in the air, thoughtful and unafraid. In early December, snow fell lightly across the rooftops, dusting the brick walls of the schoolhouse with white. Anna remained after class, erasing the board slowly, aligning the desks before closing the door. She stepped outside and crossed the square, her boots leaving faint tracks in the thin layer of snow. The fountain's water moved beneath the surface, steady and quiet. She paused there, resting her gloved hand against the stone edge. The town around her no longer felt fragile. It felt rooted. She did not think of rescue. She thought of foundation. She thought of doors opened and left open, not for one person, but for all who would enter. As evening settled, the bell rang once more from the church tower, clear and unwavering. Anna turned toward the schoolhouse, its windows glowing faintly against the winter sky. Inside, books lined the shelves. Maps hung straight. The chalkboard stood ready for another word in the morning. She walked back to the door and unlocked it once again, stepping inside to prepare the next lesson. The word she chose that night was simply build. She wrote it carefully, evenly spaced, then placed the chalk back in its tray. Outside, snow continued to fall softly over the square, covering footprints but not erasing the path that had led there. And inside the brick walls of the schoolhouse, the quiet work continued, steady and deliberate, shaping not only the future of a town, but the character of those who chose to remain and build it. The second winter in the brick schoolhouse carried a different weight than the first winter in the church. It was not about survival anymore. It was about direction. Snow fell in measured intervals, settling along the edges of the square without urgency. The fountain no longer froze entirely. Its steady stream carved a narrow path through thin ice, a quiet reminder that movement continued beneath the surface. Anna arrived before dawn as she always did, a lantern in one hand, a stack of essays in the other. The classroom greeted her with stillness, desks aligned in even rows, maps pinned firmly against the walls. The word build remained faintly visible beneath layers of erased chalk, like a foundation beneath fresh paint. She set the lantern on her desk and began reading the essays one by one. The assignment had been simple. Write about what this town will be in 10 years. The handwriting varied. Some letters leaned too far left. Some pressed hard into the paper. But the sentences carried something new. One child wrote about a library beside the river. Another described a larger market with permanent stalls. One wrote about studying at a university in a distant city, then returning home to teach. Anna paused at that line, her eyes steady, her expression unchanged. She placed a small red mark of approval in the corner and moved to the next page. When the children arrived, shaking snow from their boots, she handed the essays back without comment. "Today," she said, writing a new word on the board, responsibility. The letters were clear, evenly spaced. "It means we answer for what we choose." A boy in the second row raised his hand. "Even if no one sees?" he asked. Anna looked at him directly. "Especially then." The class fell into thoughtful silence. Outside, a wagon passed slowly across the square, its wheels leaving narrow tracks that would soon be covered by fresh snow. Life moved forward without spectacle. Near midday, the councilwoman visited the schoolhouse carrying a ledger bound in dark leather. She placed it on Anna's desk and opened it to a marked page. "Enrollment has doubled," she said quietly. "We will need another teacher by spring." Anna nodded once. "We will find one," she replied. The councilwoman studied her for a moment. "You have built more than walls," she said. Anna did not respond with pride. She responded with fact. "The town built it," she said. The councilwoman closed the ledger and left without further comment. That afternoon, Anna unlocked a small cabinet near the front of the room and removed the envelope Daniel had left months before. The dollar bills had been exchanged carefully for additional books and ink. The note remained folded inside. She unfolded it now and read the lines again. The farm is steady. My sister's classroom is full. The corn leaf pressed between the pages had grown more fragile with time, its color fading but its shape intact. Anna returned it to the arithmetic book where it rested among earlier letters. She did not linger on memory. She prepared the next lesson. In early February, a group of older students began staying after class to practice public speaking. They stood at the front of the room, shoulders squared, reading passages aloud from history books. Their voices trembled at first, then steadied. Anna listened without interruption. When one girl faltered, Anna simply said, "Again." The girl began anew, her tone firmer. Outside, the church bell rang once in the late afternoon, not for ceremony, but for routine. The town no longer held its breath between sounds. It breathed fully now. One evening, as snow drifted lightly across the square, a telegram arrived at the council office. It bore a brief message forwarded from across the ocean. Harvest was strong. Travel uncertain. Perhaps next year. Anna read the words without outward reaction. She folded the telegram and placed it beside the letters in her drawer. There was no urgency in waiting. Time had become an ally rather than an enemy. Spring began to edge its way into the town once more. The snow melted in thin streams along the gutters. The river widened, carrying reflections of pale blue sky. The brick schoolhouse stood firm, its windows thrown open to let fresh air sweep through the room. Anna stood at the front of the class and wrote a final word for the term. Character. She turned to face the students. It is not built in comfort, she said. It is built in choice. The children wrote the word carefully, some underlining it twice. After class, as the students gathered their books, one boy lingered. "Miss Weiss," he said, "will you ever leave?" The question hung gently in the air. Anna considered it without hesitation. "This is where I am needed," she replied. The boy nodded, satisfied. He did not ask again. That afternoon, Anna walked alone to the riverbank. The water moved steadily, reflecting the sky without distortion. She stood there for a moment, hands folded before her, the breeze lifting loose strands of hair from her face. She thought not of rescue, not of absence, but of foundation, of doors opened, of words written and rewritten until they held meaning. Behind her, the square carried on with quiet certainty. The market stall bustled. The fountain flowed. The bell rope swayed lightly in the tower. The schoolhouse windows caught the light of the setting sun. Anna turned from the river and walked back toward the brick building that had once been only lines in the dirt. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The chalkboard waited, clean and ready. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote one final line before leaving for the evening. Keep building. The letters stood firm against the dark surface. She set the chalk down, extinguished the lantern, and stepped back into the fading light. The town did not require saving. It required stewardship. And inside the steady walls of the schoolhouse, that work continued, deliberate and unshaken, shaping not only the minds of children but the quiet standard by which they would one day measure themselves. Spring matured into early summer with a steadiness that no longer surprised the town. The river ran full but controlled, its surface reflecting long bands of blue sky and drifting white clouds. The brick schoolhouse had grown familiar, its walls warmed by sunlight through tall windows that remained open most mornings. Anna stood at her desk before the children arrived, reviewing a list written in careful script. A second teacher had been appointed, a young woman from a nearby village who arrived each day with ink on her fingers and questions in her eyes. The classroom no longer depended on a single voice. It carried two now, sometimes three when older students volunteered to assist the younger ones. The town square had changed in quiet increments. The market stall expanded again, adding a wooden awning that shaded baskets of apples and jars of honey. The fountain basin was cleaned each month by a rotating group of volunteers. The bell rope in the church tower was replaced with a stronger line. No one announced these improvements. They appeared through repetition and care. One morning in late May, a small ceremony was arranged without much notice. It was not for a holiday. It was not for a political event. It was for the planting of a single tree near the entrance of the schoolhouse. The councilwoman stood beside Anna with a spade pressed into the soil. The children gathered in a semicircle, their notebooks tucked beneath their arms. The tree was young, no more than 6 feet tall, its leaves bright and uncertain in the breeze. It will grow slowly, the councilwoman said. Anna nodded. That is how it should grow. The children took turns adding soil around the base, pressing it gently with their hands. No speeches were given. When the final layer of earth was smoothed into place, Anna stepped forward and poured a small bucket of water at the roots. The water sank quickly into the ground. It will need care, she said. Like everything else. That afternoon, a letter arrived bearing a different tone from those before. The handwriting remained steady, but the lines were shorter. The farm will expand next year, it read. My sister has married. There is talk of travel, but nothing certain. I think often of the square and the sound of the bell. The letter did not promise return. It did not explain absence. It acknowledged distance without drama. Anna folded it and placed it inside the arithmetic book where other letters rested, alongside the pressed corn leaf now fragile as paper. She did not look toward the road. She looked toward the classroom. The term neared its close, and final examinations were underway. The older students stood before the class delivering speeches they had written themselves. One spoke about trade routes along the river. Another spoke about building bridges between towns. A girl in the back row read a passage about responsibility and choice, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Anna listened with her hands folded loosely at her waist. She did not interrupt. She did not correct minor missteps. She allowed the sentences to stand on their own. When the final student finished, the room held a brief silence, not empty, but full. Then the children returned to their seats without applause, understanding that the act of speaking clearly was its own reward. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the square, Anna remained inside the schoolhouse alone. She walked slowly between the desks, adjusting a chair here, straightening a stack of books there. Her movements were deliberate, as they had always been. On the chalkboard, she wrote a final word for the year. Stewardship. The letters were evenly spaced, firm against the dark surface. She stepped back and studied it for a moment. The word carried no emotion. It carried duty. Outside, the newly planted tree stirred in the breeze, its leaves catching the fading light. The fountain continued its steady flow. The market stall closed for the evening, shutters drawn without haste. The town did not hold its breath for change anymore. It anticipated growth through care. The following week, families gathered in the square for the closing of the school term. No grand stage was erected. No banners were hung. The children stood in neat rows before the schoolhouse, their notebooks clasped in front of them. Anna stood to one side, not at the center. The second teacher handed out certificates written in careful script. Each child stepped forward to receive theirs with a nod, then returned to their place without flourish. When the final name was called, the councilwoman stepped forward briefly. This building stands because of many hands, she said. It remains because of steady ones. Her gaze passed over Anna, but did not rest there. It did not need to. After the gathering dispersed, Anna remained near the newly planted tree. She touched one of its leaves gently between her fingers. It was stronger than it appeared. The river moved beyond the rooftops, constant and untroubled. She looked toward the church tower, where the bell rope hung straight against the wall. The door of the schoolhouse stood open behind her, as it always had. Inside, the chalkboard still bore the word stewardship in clear lines. Anna turned and walked back into the building, closing the door softly behind her. She did not lock it immediately. She moved to her desk and opened the arithmetic book where the letters were kept. She unfolded the most recent one once more, reading the lines without visible reaction. Then she placed it back inside and closed the cover carefully. The sound of the latch settling into place was quiet but certain. Outside, the square carried on with evening routines. A cart rolled across stone. A child laughed near the fountain. The young tree stood upright, roots pressing deeper into the soil. Anna finally locked the door and stepped into the fading light. The town did not require rescue. It required guardians. And in the steady rhythm of lessons, seasons, and small acts of care, she had become exactly that, not through declaration, but through choice repeated day after day. The third summer since the brick schoolhouse first opened arrived with long stretches of clear sky and a steady breeze moving in from the river. The young tree planted near the entrance had grown taller, its trunk thicker, its leaves casting a wider shadow across the steps. Children no longer noticed it as something new. They passed beneath its branches each morning without comment, as if it had always stood there. Anna arrived before sunrise, as she had done for years now. The square was quiet at that hour, the market stall still shuttered, the fountain catching the first pale light of dawn. She unlocked the schoolhouse door and stepped inside, placing her satchel on the desk near the front. The room carried the familiar scent of paper and chalk. Shelves once half empty were now filled with books sent from distant places, their spines worn from use. The wooden ruler carved with the word begin rested beside the chalk tray, its edges smooth from countless hands. Anna moved between the desks, aligning them with small, precise adjustments. The second teacher would arrive shortly, followed by the older students who now helped guide the younger ones. The rhythm of the place no longer depended on a single person. It had become its own steady current. On the chalkboard, she wrote a sentence in careful letters. Standards are quiet. They do not shout. She paused, then underlined the words once. Outside, the square stirred awake. A baker opened his door and set out trays of bread. The bell in the church tower rang a single clear note, marking the hour. Children began to gather near the schoolhouse steps, their voices light, their notebooks tucked beneath their arms. As they entered, they glanced at the chalkboard and copied the sentence into their books without instruction. One boy raised his hand. What does that mean? He asked. Anna regarded him calmly. It means the strongest things do not need noise, she replied. The boy nodded slowly and returned to his writing. Late that morning, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the square, walking rather than driving. Daniel moved at an unhurried pace, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He wore no uniform, only a simple jacket suited for travel. The lines at the corners of his eyes had softened, shaped more by sunlight than strain. He paused near the fountain, watching the children move in and out of the schoolhouse. The town no longer felt like a place suspended between endings. It felt complete in its motion. Anna noticed him through the open doorway, but did not interrupt the lesson. She finished explaining a geography exercise, then assigned the class to practice in pairs. Only then did she step outside. They stood facing one another near the shade of the young tree. No surprise. No spectacle. You have come far, she said quietly. He nodded. Not as far as you. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the remark without accepting ownership of it. The tree is strong, he observed, glancing upward at its branches. Yes, she replied. It was planted carefully. He looked toward the brick walls of the schoolhouse, then back at her. I heard about the second teacher, he said, and the library shelf. She allowed a faint smile. There are 2 shelves now. He studied her for a moment, as if measuring not distance but depth. I thought perhaps you would leave one day, he admitted. Anna shook her head gently. This is where I remain. The word carried no weight of sacrifice. It carried clarity. Inside, the sound of children reading in unison drifted through the doorway. Daniel listened, his expression steady. They sound certain, he said. They are, Anna replied. Silence settled between them, but it was not unfinished. It was complete. After a moment, Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a small book bound in simple cloth. My sister insisted, he said, handing it to her. It is about farming methods and soil care. She thought your older students might learn from it. Anna accepted the book with both hands, turning it over carefully. We will, she said. He nodded once. I cannot stay long. You never do, she answered, not as a complaint, but as fact. He looked toward the river, where sunlight shimmered across the moving water. The farm needs tending, he said. She met his gaze evenly. So does this. They did not speak of what had once been hunger or dust. They did not speak of rescue. Those chapters had become foundation, unseen but essential. The children's voices grew louder as a lesson concluded inside. Anna stepped back toward the doorway. They will have questions, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. They always do. Together they entered the schoolhouse. The children looked up, recognizing him from stories rather than memory. He stood near the back of the room while Anna introduced him simply as a friend of the school. One child raised a hand. Did you build this? The child asked. Daniel glanced at Anna before answering. No, he said. I saw it begin. The distinction settled into the room like a quiet truth. When the class ended, Daniel stepped outside once more. He paused at the fountain, listening to the water move steadily against stone. Anna remained in the doorway, watching as he turned toward the road leading out of town. He did not look back immediately. He walked a few steps, then stopped and faced her once more. No farewell speech. No promise of return. Just a nod that acknowledged what had been built and what would continue. Anna returned the nod with equal steadiness. When he disappeared beyond the bend in the street, she turned back into the classroom. The chalkboard still bore the sentence she had written that morning. Standards are quiet. They do not shout. She picked up a piece of chalk and added one final line beneath it. They endure. The children gathered around as she underlined the word carefully. Outside, the trees' leaves shifted in the breeze, casting moving patterns of light across the brick steps. The fountain flowed without interruption. The bell rope hung straight, ready for the next hour. The town carried on in its measured rhythm, not because it had been saved, but because it had chosen to rise. And inside the steady walls of the schoolhouse, Anna stood at the front of the room, not as someone rescued, but as someone who had quietly raised the standard and kept it there.